Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm ready to start the Q&A. Anyone like to start?
So, again, Ghafir is touching on a number of themes that we've covered so far. The idea of this path is going to require endurance, it's going to be challenging, you're going to face hardships. It's not going to be easy breezy. And then on the other hand, like we always hear in the masajid and khutbahs and stuff, like Deen Yusr, Allah yuridu bikum al-yusr. And the deen is supposed to be easy. So how do you reconcile those? That's a good question.
It's not al-din yusr means that if you look at the context of where you have these reports, it's about legal matters and about issues of rukhas and issues of the law accommodating exceptions, so that people would not needlessly suffer hardship. The issue is not in Surah Ghafir or Zumar is that hardship is a goal to be pursued for its own sake, but it is a realistic grounding in what it means to live in pursuit of the truth and in justice and in being on the side of haqq. That as who is it? I think I noted it. Like for just an example. Yeah, so in Qushairi, says okay, here we go then. We'll try to find it. عجيبة. Look at this thing.
That's a double tap.
That's a double tap?
Should I?
Do you want to come here?
You want Rami?
Yes, Rami, please. Oh, see, now that Rami stood up, it stopped doing it.
It's like it got scared of Rami and then it stopped. Wait, hold on. Where are you? Where's Ibn Ajiba?
It's number 6, Sharif. Towards the end of it.
Do you want the hard copy? It's right here.
Can you find the surah for the Ghafir?
Yeah, Monsieur Ghafir.
Oh.
You've got to go old school.
Gonna stay there.
Technology is a bid'ah.
I should issue a fatwa that technology is
عن دلالة كل دلالة في النار.
So for instance, in Ibn Ajiba, say, فكل ما لحق الرسل من الإيذاء يلحق الأولياء فقد كذبت وتحذب عليهم أهل عصرهم وهموا بأخذهم وجادلوا بالباطل ليدحضوا نور الله بأفواههم والله متم نوره فأخذهم الله بالخذلان والبعد والخلود في النار والقطيعة والحجاب. The idea is that the expectation that if you stand by the path of truth, there will be a tahazzub against you. And you might be pleasantly surprised and you find that there is no tahazzub against you and actually you get the support of people. But that should come as a pleasant surprise. But spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, you should prepare yourself. So the al-din al-yusr is not a license to fudge morality or to fudge ethics so that you can enjoy the luxuries of life or so that you can enjoy farah without haqq. That was never intended and a complete misapplication of the idea that Islam is a religion of ease. Islam, yes, when it comes to the laws of God doesn't want us to suffer, but Islam is clear as to where people should stand vis-a-vis truth, ethics, principles, virtue.
What is tahazzub?
Tahazzub is when people gather up against you.
Other questions? Okay. So we have a question about Isra wal Miraj, and I was asking the Sheikh before we started, he's actually given several khutbahs about this topic, so I want to refer you to those. They're easy to find on YouTube. Just search up Isra Miraj. I think he gave them at the Islamic Center of Southern California. So,
the issue of the one thing I'll just say about Isra Miraj, because this comes up all the time, was it an actual physical ascension or a spiritual ascension? And they've been debated and discussed so long in the Islamic tradition, and personally, I think it was a physical ascension. I don't think it was just a spiritual ascension. But I don't think it matters. It doesn't matter in terms of the construction of the consciousness of the Prophet ﷺ. And it doesn't matter in terms of what the meaning of Isra al-Mi'raj is. And it doesn't matter in terms of what it symbolizes in terms of the transformation of the Islamic message. And I think Muslims should be tolerant. If some people ultimately, after looking at the debates, decide that it was a spiritual ascension, but not material, fine. If they believe it was material, as I believe it, that it was actually in body, that's it's not something that Muslims should divide over.
Grace, I do have one more
Okay,
question.
yeah, please.
So you mentioned how this reformer is another, like, yes, he's responding to Fir'aun, but it's also about addressing the inner Fir'aun. And then early on in the surah, there was that verse that, I mean, it's interesting because Fir'aun deifies himself and wants to, be obeyed and worshipped. And early on in the surah, there is this reference to that they're only going to believe if they can associate with God. So is it correct to understand that the inner Fir'aun is this ego that wants to also set itself up besides God and wants to see what it wants to see? Like when Fir'aun says you're not going to see except what
What I want you to see.
what I want you to see. And then is there a relationship between that and the treacherous gaze that is mentioned early on in the surah?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because in Surah Ghafir, unlike later surah, where Surah Ghafir does not tell us that Fir'aun wanted to be worshipped, but Fir'aun, it does tell us that Fir'aun is a haughty and arrogant person, and whose attitude towards people is one where he is willing to oppress and abuse human beings. He has very little regard for what is principled or truthful, and who has that conceited attitude of, well, you should see what I want you to see. So it's interesting because it's in Surah Ghafir, you could easily see how it becomes possible to talk about the inner Fir'aun, and you're right, the inner Fir'aun is that ego, the ego that, as the Surah Al-Ghafir itself describes it, that يفرحون بغير حق, that wants to be jubilant, wants to be hubris, wants to be self-referential, and it doesn't want to be bothered by things such as principles and rules and right and wrong and just or unjust and so on. I hadn't thought that of its connection with the nose, the treacherous eye, but I think that makes sense. Yeah, I can see the connection.
More questions? Okay. So, someone wants to know if in other places in the Quran where Uli al-Bab are mentioned, if that is also always referring to the Jews or the rabbis of old.
No, Ulil al-Bab is mentioned in the Quran in several places, but it's not always uh, it's not in the context of referring to um, Jews or rabbis. It is always refers to the idea of the reflecting intellect. Al-lub is beyond the aql. That the aql is the intellect in the intellect that is able to assess causation, equations, relationships. But al-lub is supposed to be the part of the aql that sees long term. In other words, al-lub is the part of the aql that that has access to wisdom. So ulil albab is not just people with intellect, but people with wisdom. And the Quran often, depending on the context, it will speak specifically of those who have wisdom. Now, in the context, like for instance, when talking about understanding the ways that when Allah says that Allah gives victory to the righteous, that's one context where the Quran will often talk about ulil albab and not yaqilun, because it requires wisdom to understand the nature of victory, not simple rationality. But you can write an entire book about Quranic usage of ulil albab. I mean, there are so many different, yeah.
Okay, great. Regarding the verse, those who dispute concerning the signs of God is repeated multiple times throughout the surah. If we were to understand this surah metaphorically, could this refer to the dialogue and struggle between the inner pharaoh and the reformer that we have in all of us?
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Do you think the stories of Moses are historical, and what do you make of the lack of archaeological evidence of the Exodus?
My gut feeling is to say yes, they're historical, but lack of archaeological evidence. I mean, I've there are several things I know about archaeology. One is that it's a science that looks often to track historical records for something that that far in the past. A lot of archaeology is built on speculations from very little evidence. I mean, you locate literally quite very little, and the other thing is that archaeology, especially archaeology in the Holy Land, is highly politicized, and has become sadly, I mean, even among academics, and I could tell you stories about my colleagues in archaeology and the battles they fight with each other, and the one way to truly learn to dislike academia is the field of archaeology. So it doesn't surprise me that there is no historical evidence, but I wouldn't close the book on this matter because I would love to see the field of archaeology thoroughly reformed. Archaeology from the time of colonialism, but even more than the period of the time of colonialism, has become the trapped, become what is the word I'm looking for? Fell to big money and to
captured.
captured and captive to sources of funding and where they come from, and try to do archaeology for the traces of Palestinian life in the Holy Land is something that is inconsistent with the narrative that the Israeli state wants. And good luck. Not only will you not get funding, but even if you get funding, you will not be allowed to even come close to any of the sites. And it's remarkable. I mean, it has become so politicized that I've nearly reached the point where I've stopped reading in the field of archaeology because I've just become so thoroughly demoralized about this entire field. And some of what I know happened to colleagues in the academy.
Okay. I actually had a question. In the beginning, I mean, you say the surah starts out with this notion of pay attention, right? Like something is coming.
Ham.
Right.
If it's ham, yeah.
And it's interesting because if you're thinking about the Muslims and what they knew at the time, as you pointed out, I mean, the surah goes on and it is sort of talking about, like what they're going to encounter, but also what they're going to encounter within themselves. But it feels almost like, it's interesting, like Zumar comes in and says, purify yourself. But then Ghafir comes and says, as you take this journey, now that you're turning outwards, be ready because it's going to get really, really hard, right? And then in some ways it's like, almost to Rami's point, like the idea of ease. It's sometimes, like to me, like when you're supposed to stand up for truth, that is ease in itself, right? It kind of cuts through the BS of it's like, yeah, you got all these other considerations, but honestly, if you're just standing up for truth, that in some ways makes the path, or the path very clear. Not easy, but clear. So I'm just trying to understand, like, okay, when you say pay attention, get ready, it feels like there's something else, like there's supposed to be, like this message is almost like okay, you know what I want from you internally, but now get ready because you're going to have to go out and do more. Is that?
No, but I mean, ham, if that, it's like, the assignment is to reflect and study Ghafir itself, and then as we know from the various riwayat, that the companions would make it a point that they would work to implement each surah that they studied. So to transform a surah like Ghafir into a program of life, to an actual, I mean, can you, that's the if you're talking about like go, that's it. It's, you are being empowered to believe that there is no real understanding of the truth unless you accept accountability and that justice is a prime imperative, but that also this type of despotism and closed-mindedness that the Surah Ghafir talks about is an affliction, and it's setting you to basically then go and carry that message. Inevitably it's going to result in an increased level of persecution, and then it tells you you have to endure and you have to persevere. I mean, what more would you want from them? It's that's quite sufficient to saying get ready and go. I mean, even if it's telling us today get ready and go, which I mean, let's see how many people can take Surah Ghafir to heart and actually implement it. I mean, it's easy to say, oh well, yeah, we get it, but actually implement it, actually commit to the idea that I will be a beacon for truthful causes wherever I can and wherever I may. I will not tolerate injustice. I will not tolerate arrogance. I will not tolerate my own arrogance. I will fight the pharaohs within and without.
These are like two really heavy-duty surahs,
Yeah.
one after another, like between Zumar and Ghafir.
And Ghafir, yeah.
Do we know like how much time passed between them?
Very short. I mean, not weeks, but I mean not days, but you know, if the reports, it was a month or so.
And this was before Isra wal Miraj.
Yeah, before Surah Al-Miraj.
Is this revealed before or after Sod, Sheikh? Because I'm thinking, the kind of message of, yeah, they may seem to be very happy, but really they hate themselves. It's kind of like the Izzah or Shiqaq.
Before Sod,
Yeah,
it was revealed after Sod.
after Sod.
After Sod.
Interesting. Any more questions here? Okay. Since the Abadi school comes from the Khawarij, but later moderated, what are some notable later opinions about Ali and the Abadi school?
The Abadi school transforms at so many levels. Abadi, Ali, because I've actually read quite a few of the Abadi sources. Imam Ali is referenced authoritatively in Abadi sources. The Ibadis, their main difference with Sunnis became their theory of imama and some other aspects, but it's not at all unusual to find in Ibadi law citations to Imam Ali and so on. One of the things that surprised me in some Ibadi sources is this sort of distancing themselves from the Khawarij that rebelled against Ali. They say, well, these are not really the founders of the Ibadi school. The Ibadi school goes back to the Qurra at the time of the Prophet, but not to the Khawarij who led all these rebellions. I mean, it's a sort of a unsubstantiated historical claim, but yeah, I wouldn't. It would be a mistake to find too many connections between the historical Khawarij and the Abadi school as it exists now. I mean, I'm not sure about the Ibadi school a few centuries before, because they've underwent several transformations, but yeah.
Okay. Earlier, there was a description about people who are not sure why they're not making God Almighty supreme in their life, although they know that they're not pagans. What advice would you give for someone who's suddenly aware that they fall into that category, in that state?
I mean, remember, it is the niyyah, the intent and the effort that counts. If you are sincerely seeking to purify the self, and you catch yourself, you know, I've the very, you know, some people from that I know, and you know, they were raised, for instance, in very patriarchal families. The man is the king of the whatever, you know, they're accustomed to issuing orders and everyone listening to them and so on. And I've known men who, you know, realize, they come to the realization that this is not the way a Muslim should behave, and this is this you know, going around barking orders and yelling whenever things are not according to whatever you want is not the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and it's not the way a Muslim should behave, and it's completely, and you know, they struggle with it. They're sometimes, you know, when they remember, they're sweet, but then they forget, and then they remember, and then they forget. And you know, it is the intent and the effort. If Allah knows that your intent is sincere and you are trying, then trust in Allah's mercy. The problem is when you become stubborn and argumentative and say, I need not change. The way I am is the way I am, and it's good. That's where the problem is. You know, I've known, of course, from back home, you know, I've known tons of men who, you know, they do all the, you know, they worship, they're always worshiping, they fast, they go to Hajj and Umrah and so on, but they're tyrants, and their family, you know, and they somehow, and if they were present in a halaqah like this, I would become their enemy immediately. You know, the minute they walk away from the halaqah, they would start maligning me to their family, or, you know, who is this guy I think he is, you know, blah blah. You know, we've all encountered stuff like that. You hate the messenger because the message hurts, and that's very, you know, these are the types of people that are in serious trouble. The people who turn their angst against everything in the world but any type of self-critical insight that says the problem is within. But if you've already noticing that your devotion to Allah needs work, that's a good sign. You know, just keep at it. And the more sincere you are, the more Allah will help you.
Okay, thank you so much. We are at the end of our time, so I want to thank everybody for joining us, and thank you, Sheikh, for an amazing heavy-duty session again. And inshallah, I look forward to seeing everybody, inshallah, on Tuesday. Have a great weekend. Okay, assalamu
Assalamu
alaikum.
alaikum.